Hi everybody, welcome to our live event. My name is Brenda KB Anderson. I'm a crochet designer and instructor, and today we are going to be working on the Glow Up. It's a Christmas light sweater makeover. Let me show you our project here. So we're going to be working on this. We're not going to be actually making the sweater. I'll talk a little bit about that in just a second, but we're going to be working on the applique of the Christmas lights. So just in case you're curious too, you could use these Christmas lights. You don't have to put it on a sweater. You could put it on a pillow or a blanket, or you could use a fine gauge yarn, and then you could decorate a Christmas card or something with it, like a little crocheted holiday lights thing. Just kind of glue it onto the front of a card. There's lots of uses for this applique. You don't have to use it for a sweater. But I thought that this would be kind of a fun project to do to sort of revamp an old sweater that you have, or to make something into a holiday sweater that wasn't before. So I was thinking about, I really like the idea of using the things that you already have, repurposing things, rescuing old sweaters from thrift stores. This is a theme that we come back to every once in a while. If you guys have watched my live events, I like to do stuff like this. I like to rescue wool sweaters and make them into mittens. I like to unravel sweaters and knit them or crochet them into other things. So yeah, we're kind of back on that theme. And this sweater right here on the table, this is not actually an old sweater. This is a sweater that is from my class, that is a top-down raglan class, which is available on the Creative Crochet Corner website and also on Craftsy, in case you're curious about the sweater. It's just a super, super simple top-down raglan sweater. It's like great for beginners. So I kind of wanted to show you what that would look like on something that was new, but then I also thrifted this sweater. Of course, it doesn't have to be blue. It just sort of happened that way. I thrifted this sweater, and I'm going to be adding the applique to this during our live event today. So this is going to be, I just wanted to show you guys some options. You don't have to spend a lot of money to have yourself a holiday sweater, because I'm guessing you probably have some yarn scraps in your stash. And if you don't, you could look for like those little mini skeins or bonbons, or just, those, I can't remember some of the other brand names, but they do sell small amounts of yarn in an array of colors and kind of a collection. You could look for those. If you're trying to save money and you don't already have colors that you would use for holiday lights or Christmas light bulbs. So, all right. We've got a good morning from snowy Michigan. Hi, Martha. Thanks for popping in and saying hi to everybody. So for this project, like I kind of touched on, it would be great if you rated your stash first and looked for worsted weight yarn. In this project, I used anything from an Aran weight to a DK. They're actually different weights, and if you really scrutinize this sweater, you can see that this green light bulb is a little bigger than this yellow light bulb. It's just because they're different yarn weights, but that just did not bother me, and I wanted to show that you could use things that you have. It doesn't all have to be perfect, and they don't have to be exactly the same kind of yarn. So I've got some wool, some acrylic, some cotton. You can use whatever would crochet up to be a little a nice neat and tidy light bulb. You probably don't want to use something like a mohair or something like that, or like a super textured yarn, but pretty much anything else will work. So look for a worsted weight yarn, which is a number 4, and just think about what colors of light bulbs you'd like to have. They could all be the same color. They could all be different colors like this. You can just sort of Google Christmas lights and then get some ideas for different color palettes, because not all Christmas lights are the same colors. You don't have to use the colors that I have here as well. But I did use, just so I use a light pink, red, yellow, green, and a blue here. And then I have 2 accent colors. So I have one color, I use black in this sweater. For this part of the light bulb, what do we call that? Hang on a second, I want to see how I labeled that in my pattern here. Oh, I labeled it the sockets. So for the socket and the cord, so that little section there, I just use a black worsted weight. This is an acrylic, but you could use whatever whatever fiber you like for that. And then just a tiny amount of white yarn. This white yarn actually has a little bit of a glitter in it, which I thought was cute. It's got like a little filament of kind of a glittery thread running through that, so that makes an extra kind of sparkly addition to it. But of course that's not necessary. But I really feel like this little white accent on those bulbs really makes it a lot more fun. So I would I hope that you like that part too and that you add that to your light bulb because I feel like it just gives it extra dimension. It really makes it look a lot more like a light bulb to me to see that little shine. All right. Oh, and we've got a good morning from Dana in Pennsylvania. Hi, Dana. Oh, and Dana says the crochet sweater shown in the photo as lovely as their pattern for that. Okay, so the photo, the sweater in the photo is this one that I have right here in front of me. This is called the Felicity sweater, and it's from my class that's called the Top-Down Raglan class. So you can find that on Craftsy and under classes, or you can also find that at the Creative Crochet Corner website underneath the classes tab as well. And then I lead you through the whole process of making a sweater. It's really great for beginners. It's very, very simple. Yeah. Okay, so let's see. All right, so we talked about your yarn. I am using an H hook, which is a 5mm hook, but you can use whatever hook size you need to in order to get a light bulb that looks the size and sort of stitch definition that you like. You know, this is not the kind of project where you need to do a bunch of swatching. You just make a light bulb and you look at it and decide if you like it. You can go up a hook size if you feel like your light bulb is too stiff. You know, or it's hard to get your hook into your stitches, or you can go down some hook sizes if you feel like you needed a smaller light bulb. You know, you can just kind of alter the size and shape of your light bulb with your hook size to get what you like. And it really doesn't take very long to make the bulb, so you might as well just make one, check it out, and if it feels stiff, go up a hook size. If it feels too drapey and there's holes in it, go down a hook size to just kind of get the light bulb that you wanted for your sweater. Okay. Let's see, so you need an H hook, 5mm hook, or whatever hook is going to work out for your yarn choice. And then you're going to need an array of colors for your bulbs, a color for the sockets, and a little bit of an accent color for that little gleam in it. And then of course you're going to need your sweater. And then also you're going to need just a tapestry needle. And I would suggest, if you have one, to use a sharp tapestry needle like this one. This has a little bit of a sharper tip to it. If you don't have one, it's not worth going out to get a different tapestry needle, but if you just happen to have one, I feel like this works just a little bit easier for sewing your pieces together, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later when we start doing the assembly process. All right. That is, oh, and then stitch markers also. You will need a handful of stitch markers. That'll just help you keep your place in the light bulb and know where to join the socket when we start working through that. So just in case you're wondering, you know, each of these bulbs is crocheted separately, and then we create the cords and the socket all in one piece, and that's how we connect the bulbs. Okay, so you don't have, you know, like, you don't have to make a separate little socket piece and then do a chain to connect everything. You're just going to be working on that cord, making the socket, crocheting across the next cord, making the socket, and then that way, that's how you connect all of your lights together. And then after that, you can do the assembly, which is where you just pin things on and stitch them in place. And we'll go into all that as we get a little further into our demo today. All right, so I'm going to move this out of the way and we can get started on a light bulb. So I do have in your download, which is free to everyone, I have the complete instructions, and then I also talk about, you know, what types of yarns you could use, and I have instructions on how to work the specific stitches. So for the light bulb itself, those are all pretty basic stitches, but when we work the socket, we're going to be doing something that's a linked stitch, which is a little bit unusual. It's kind of like a mini section of Tunisian crochet just for a second, but don't let that scare you. It's really easy, but I do have instructions for all of that, which you may want to hang on to just when you get to that part, just to kind of remember how to do that bit. All right, so you'll need about maybe 15 yards for 2 bulbs. And the reason that I gave you the yarn amount for 2 bulbs is because I have bulbs on the front and bulbs on the back of my sweater. And I used like the same 5 colors on the front and then the same 5 colors on the back. Of course, you can do this however you like. You know, you don't have to do that. They could be all different colors if you wanted to, all the same color if you wanted them to be the same color. That's completely fine. I just wanted to give you some sort of yarn amount so you would know where to start. But you just basically need like less than a, you know, just a very small ball of yarn will get you at least 2 of the bulbs. All right, so let's see. I'm gonna start out with this, and we're gonna be working on making the bulb here. Actually, okay, I'll do pink because I think that'll show, well, this one will show up a little bit better, I think. Okay, so we can come in a little bit closer here and we'll start working on our bulb. All right. So first you're going to start with a slip knot. So however you like to make that, I'll just make my loop, flip it over onto the strand that's connected to the ball. I'm going to add my crochet hook under that loop and tighten that up. And then we're going to chain 8. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. All right, so now if you take a look at your chain, you have a bunch of little V's here that kind of all go in this direction. And if you roll them over onto the table, you can see there's all those little horizontal dashes. That's where we're going to work underneath. We're going to work under each dash when we do our first row. So we're going to skip the first dash by the hook. We're skipping that chain next to the hook, and we're going to go underneath the dash from the second chain. Okay, so we're going to insert our hook, yarn over, pull up a loop, and then we're going to insert our hook into the next chain, insert, yarn over, pull up a loop, and now we have 3 loops on our hook, and we're going to yarn over and pull through 2 stitches and yarn over and pull through 2 stitches. This is what I'm calling the beginning link double crochet here, and we linked it to that original chain there instead of having that separate, just to make that part of the bulb just a little bit more solid. So now we're going to add 2 more double crochets into that same chain, the last chain we worked into, which is right there. Okay, so to do a double crochet, we're going to yarn over, insert into that same stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. Now we're going to do another double crochet. So yarn over, insert in that same space, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. So now what we have is that beginning linked double crochet right there. So that counts as a double crochet. So 1 double crochet and then 2 more double crochets, and they're all worked into that same stitch right there. So we've got 3 double crochets so far. Now we're going to do another double crochet but into the next chain. So we're going to yarn over, insert into the next chain, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. Now we're going to do a half double crochet into the next chain. So we yarn over, insert into the next chain, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, and pull through all 3. That's a half double crochet, and we're going to do that one more time into the next chain. So yarn over, insert in the next chain, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, and pull through all 3. So you should have 2 chains remaining here. So 1, 2. In our next chain, we're going to do 1 single crochet. So we're going to insert, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, and pull through 2. There's our single crochet. And here is our next chain. So we're going to do 2 single crochets here. So 1 single crochet and 2 single crochets. All right, so just to review, we've got that linked double crochet plus 2 more double crochets. That's all worked into that stitch. Then in the next stitch, we have another double crochet. Then we have a half double crochet into each of the next 2 chains, a single crochet into the next chain, and 2 single crochets into the last chain. Now we're going to rotate our piece just like we're turning a steering wheel, okay? So we're just going to rotate it like this. We're not flipping it over. We're just kind of spinning it around upside down. And we're going to work 1 single crochet into that very same stitch we just placed those 2 single crochets into, okay? So the very first chain, now we're working across the bottom of that same foundation chain. We're going to insert our hook here and place 1 more single crochet. So there's really a total of 3 single crochets into that very last chain on the end there. All right, so now we're going to do a single crochet into the next chain, and then a half double crochet into each of the next 2 chains. So yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up, yarn over, pull through 3, and then same thing in the next chain, yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up, yarn over, pull through 3, and now we're going to do a double crochet into the next stitch. So yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. And now you can see there's one more stitch right here, or one more chain right here. All those chains, or all those stitches were worked into it. You can see them all kind of radiating out of that eye. We're going to work 3 double crochets into that same space. So yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. We'll do 2 more of those. Yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. One more. Yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. All right? So that has finished our next round, and we don't need to join or anything. We're just going to continue working in a spiral. So our next stitch is going to be worked right here into the top of that linked double crochet. If you're having trouble finding that, you can see those are our little chains right there along the edge, and our linked double crochet is right up here. It's directly above this little horizontal bar that you can see right here. So that's the top. Also, if you haven't gotten this far and you're going to start this later, you can always put a stitch marker in that very first stitch that you make, and then it'll be really easy to tell where the beginning stitch is until you kind of get your eye trained to spot it. All right, so now we're going to do 2 single crochets into that very first stitch. So insert, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. There's the first one. And let's place a stitch marker in that stitch there. And then we'll put another single crochet into the same stitch right here. And then we're going to do 2 single crochets into each of the next 2 stitches. So 1, 2, and 1, and 2. Now we're going to do a single crochet into each of the next 5 stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then here is that stitch right on the tip of your light bulb here. We're going to do 3 single crochets right there into that stitch. So 1, 2, 3. And then we're going to do a single crochet into each of the next 5 stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And now we're going to do 2 single crochets into each of the next 3 stitches. So 1 and 2, 1 and 2, 1 and 2. All right, and then we're going to place a stitch marker in the second to the last stitch that we just made. Okay, so the last 2 stitches we made, those were 2 single crochets. They're right here. So there's the top of the last 2. So we're counting back from the very last stitch we made. So there's the last stitch, there's the second to the last stitch, and I'm going to place a stitch marker in that stitch. Okay, and now I can remove this stitch marker. That was just marking the beginning of our round so we would know where to place our next stitch. And we're just going to do a round of slip stitches. So I'm going to pull this out, and then I'm going to go ahead and make a slip stitch in that stitch, and then a slip stitch into each stitch around. And those slip stitches should sit right on the top surface of your light bulb. The point of these slip stitches is just to kind of give the edge of your light bulb a little bit more definition. And when you sew these light bulbs onto something else, it'll still remain nice and crisp along the edge. It's not going to get distorted and pulled out of shape. So we're just doing a slip stitch, and those slip stitches are making all these little V's that just kind of sit right on the top surface of the light bulb. If you guys have any questions about what I'm doing or suggestions, or if you have other ideas about what you could use this applique for, let us know. Put that in the comments. I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say. All right, so here is that spot that was marked. I'm going to place the stitch marker back in that same stitch. I probably could have just left it there and just slip stitched right in front of it. but I just accidentally pulled it out. But we're leaving that in that same spot. And now I'm going to do a slip stitch into the very last stitch. And then I'm going to cut my yarn, giving it a good yarn tail, like, I don't know, maybe 12, 16 inches or so. Because we're going to be using that yarn tail to stitch all the way around the edge of that light bulb. And I'm just going to go ahead and pull that right through to the front of the work. And we'll deal with that later. Okay, but in the meantime, we can weave in one end, so this end right here, the beginning yarn tail. And if you know, as you're making these, you can go ahead and work over your yarn tail for like half a round or so, and then you don't even have to weave this in. If you'd like to do that, you can do that. Otherwise, it just takes a second to just kind of weave it along the edge of that bulb in the back. And you don't have to worry about it too much unless you're using like a super slippery yarn or something, because that was the beginning of your yarn tail. It shouldn't be unraveling or anything like that. So I'm going to go ahead and just cut that off. Oops. There we go. And then you can make as many other light bulbs and as many other colors as you like. So for this, just for the purposes of stringing them together and showing you the next step, I've got one done here in each of those 5 colors. Okay, so we've got red, pink, yellow, green, blue. And then once you have all of the light bulbs that you're going to be needing, so let me back up a little and talk about the sweater and the spacing just a little bit. So I found it doesn't really matter what size sweater you're making. I mean, within reason, of course, if you're making like a little tiny baby sweater, you'll definitely need less bulbs, or also you may want to consider using a finer gauge yarn. So you might want to use something like a sock weight or something like that to make a little petite light bulb instead of these larger ones. Or, you know, if that's just kind of more your style or your taste, or if you're using a fine gauge sweater, something that's a little thinner. So both of the sweaters that I have here, this one was crocheted up with a worsted weight, you know, so it's a fairly bulky sweater, and so is this one, the one that I thrifted. This is a fairly large weight yarn. It's pretty thick, kind of a chunky sweater. If you're using something that's a finer gauge, you probably should consider using a lighter gauge yarn to make these light bulbs, just so that it doesn't seem like something quite so heavy on a very fine gauge sweater. Just a thought. But you know, as long as you are happy with the size of your light bulbs, you can start placing them on your sweater, just kind of placing them around the neck. And for most, like what I was saying was, you know, for most sweaters, like average child, you know, maybe children from about 7 or 8 up through adult, your neck opening isn't really going to be all that hugely different. It's not going to vary a lot between sizes, because you know, our heads are really only a couple of inches or a few inches different in circumference, really, which doesn't really add up to a lot when you're spacing these light bulbs around. So for most people, if you want it to look like the sweater that I have in the picture, you would just need 10 bulbs and you should be good. But maybe you wanted to sneak some extra colors in there or have fewer colors, you can kind of play around with that and play with the spacing. So something to think about, you know, is you may want to lay this out on your sweater and look at how all of the spacing in between, let me just pull this in here so you guys can see, the spacing in between your bulbs should look. So in my sweater, I've got a space between the bulbs that's just a little bit wider than the width of one of these bulbs, just to kind of give you, you know, something to compare to. If you feel like you need more space, you can always drop the bulbs just a little bit further away from the neckline, and that gives you a wider circumference. If you feel like they're, you know, you want them to be a little bit closer together, you can bring them up towards the neckline just a little bit, and then have them closer together. You can, you know, of course you can have a different number of bulbs as well if you'd like. So once you've figured out, you know, the colors, the spacing and all that, you can just make sure you have the right number of bulbs. Then you can line them all up on the table in front of you so that you know what order you want to attach them together when you make that socket. Because when you are crocheting them together, that is determining the order that they're going to be in when they're on your sweater. You can't switch swap, you know, where the colors go once you string them all together. So just make sure that you know what order you want them to be in, how you want them to look. so arrange them on your table in the way that, you find pleasing to your eye. So maybe we could do it this way. Before, in my sweater, I actually have it like this, which I think looks nice as well. But you can do it, whatever order you like. And, as long as you get all those beginning yarn tails dealt with now, otherwise you're going to end up with a whole bunch of yarn tails all over the place, and it might be kind of frustrating. So I like to weave those in and get rid of those right away, and then leave the long tail for sewing just hanging out there until after we've attached them all together. So for the socket color, as I said before, I used black in my sample. This new sample that I'm doing is actually going to be a dark green color, which is actually seems more likely, like I've seen a lot more Christmas lights with this sort of dark green color connecting them together. But I've also seen brown, so you can, and also you don't have to make them exactly, like this doesn't have to be true to life if you don't want it to be. People will still get that it's a, Christmas light. So if you have another color like a dark purple or something like that, that looks nice with the colors, looks nice with the color of your sweater, you can totally use that. People will still recognize them as holiday lights. But I feel like as long as it's kind of a, contrasting to all of the light bulbs themselves, I think that's kind of what you need to look out for. That's the most important part, I think, about choosing your color. So I'm going to be using this brown color, and actually I'm going to move the wood out of the way so you guys can see a little bit better, because I feel like that's just a little too close to the color of my background here. I'm using this light brown color, even though I would not actually want to use this for my sweater. I just want you guys to really be able to see the stitches that I'm making, so that's why I'm switching to this brown color instead of a dark green or black or something like that. All right, let me lay these out one more time here. Okay, so if you have a different purpose for these, of course you should think about how much space you want between the bulbs, like how long you want the cord to be. In my sweater, my cord kind of zigzags. I think it looks really cute when it has little loops and little zigzags. It just looks sort of more organic and like, just kind of threw these Christmas lights on here. I feel like it's just a little more believable, and it reminds you of the tangle of all the Christmas lights when you you first pull them out, not the first year, but the second year after they've been hastily put away. So think about how you probably want to have a little more space. You don't want your cord just to go from one light to the other. Unless you do, then you need to have fewer chains. So just think about that. I recommend doing 20 chains, but you can also look at that spacing, place those light bulbs on your sweater. And when you're working through this, once you get a couple of lights connected, lay them back on your sweater and look at it and see if the length between them is a good amount. You can always chain more or chain less to adjust for whatever it is that you're making. All right, so we're going to start out by chaining 20. So I'm going to place a slip knot on my hook and chain 20 to get us started here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Valerie says this would make a cute holiday pillow. I think so too. And I think it would be cute if it was just sort of, snaking across all over the place on the pillow. I think that would be really adorable. Maybe going around to the back of it too a little bit. That'd be fun. Sandy says, hi Brenda. Hi Sandy. Late to the party, but I wonder if you could make 2 bulbs out of each color, crochet them together and fill them with a bit of polyfill and make a garland out of them to put on a bookcase. You absolutely could do that. You certainly could. Yeah, you can just make, and I would say don't do that final round of slip stitches until you start putting the light bulbs together, just because it might get really thick then. So just hold off on that final round of slip stitches, put them wrong side together, and then you can slip stitch them together to kind of create that edging, and at the same time, slip stitching them together. And once you get almost all the way around, put a little bit of stuffing in there. And then you'll just do 1 row of the cord and the socket, into your bulb, if that makes sense. That'd be really cute. Another thing, this is something that I have actually done before, not with this particular garland, but with other things that I've crocheted that are flat. If I want to make a garland, out of it, like these flat applique pieces, I will cut out a little piece of felt that's the same size, that could be the backing, and I just put a little bit of hot glue around the edge and just a drizzle in the middle and place that felt on the backing. And then when that dries, it's nice and stiff and it gives it a little bit of, just a little tiny bit of weight, so it isn't like curling up and doing weird, unusual things. So if you didn't want to stuff it, that's another route that you could take. You could just add a little bit of felt onto the back. Thanks for that idea, Sandy. It's a very good idea. Okay, so we've got our 20 chains, and now we're going to start connecting our bulbs together. Instead of starting with the blue, because I feel like that's kind of dark, I'm actually going to reverse these so you guys can see what I'm doing a little bit better here. We'll start with the red. And that little stitch marker, that's telling us where we're going to work our first stitch. Okay, so that's why we left that stitch marker in there. We're going to start out by doing a standing double treble. So what a standing stitch is when you imagine you're going to just start working down here and making a tall stitch. Instead of doing a slip stitch and chaining up, you just kind of pretend like you've been crocheting along, and then you make your next stitch right here. So that might sound kind of weird if you've never done that before, and it is kind of weird the first couple times you do it. But what I would recommend is this, is hang on to your chain so that it can't spin around your hook. So I'm hanging onto it with my fingers, and I'm going to yarn over 3 times. So 1, 2, 3, that's how many we normally yarn over for a double treble. Then we're going to insert our hook into that marked stitch, and we're going to yarn over and pull up a loop. Then we're going to yarn over. See how I'm still like hanging onto this so it can't spin around? Yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, and yarn over, pull through 2. Okay, so you're going to do that yarn over, pull through 2 thing 4 times. So this is called a double treble, but that was a standing double treble. And we'll do that again when we get to the next bulb in case you need to see that again. Of course, you can always go back and watch this. And now we're going to do a linked treble, a linked double treble. So if you take a look at this, you can see that there are these sort of horizontal strands of yarn. They're a little bit at a diagonal. Here, let me point with something else. So you have one right here, and then another one right here, okay? So right there, and right there. You're going to pick up loops from those spaces, and what that's going to do is it's going to link the stitch we're making to this beginning, that standing double treble. So we're going to place our hook from top to bottom, I like to think about it, or you can kind of turn your work sideways and go from right to left. But in either way, you're going from, where your hook is attached down toward the light bulb. You're going to yarn over and draw up a loop. Okay, and we're going to do that again under the next sort of horizontal bar there. Draw up a loop, and then here's the third horizontal bar. Bring up a loop, and now we have 4 loops on our hook. Now we're going to go into the next stitch, which is right here, and we're going to yarn over, pull up a loop, and then we're going to yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. Again, because we're doing that double treble, we're doing that motion, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. We're doing that motion 4 times. Okay, and now when we did that, it's going to make these little horizontal bars even more clear on this stitch. Do you see them here? 1, 2, 3. So that's where we're going to be pulling up our loops. So we're going to go from top to bottom, or right to left if you're holding it sideways. Grab a loop, grab a loop, grab a loop, and then we're going to go into the next stitch, which is right here. Grab a loop, and then we're going to yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. Okay, now we're going to do that one more time. Do you see those horizontal bars? So we've got one here, here, and here. Okay, we're not counting that top one. So here, here, and here. So we're going to grab a loop from each one of those. So 1, 2, 3. So with linked stitches like these, you're grabbing loops from a stitch instead of just doing yarn overs before your stitch, but you still have the same amount. Like we would have yarned over 3 times to do a double treble and then inserted our hook, but instead of just doing a regular yarn over, we're just grabbing those loops from the previous stitch. And now we're going to go in here, yarn over, pull up a loop. All right, now we have 5 loops on our hook. Sorry, I should do that. 5 loops on our hook. Then we're going to yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. All right, and that is how we make our socket. And then we're going to chain 20 more chains. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. All right, now we're going to grab our next color and we're going to do that standing double crochet. So we're going to yarn over, I'm grabbing that chain with my fingers so that it can't spin around, and I'm going to yarn over 3 times. 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to insert this into, well, this is supposed to be marked here. Sorry, there is supposed to be a stitch marker there, but we're going to insert it right there. Yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. There's our first, that's our standing double treble. And now you can see there's these little horizontal, well, there's slightly diagonal, but 1, 2, and 3, and that's where we're going to be picking up our loops from. So 1, 2, and 3, and then we're going to insert our hook into the next stitch. Right there, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. Okay, now we're going to do 2 more linked stitches. So basically we have a standing double treble, and then we have 3 linked stitches afterwards. So we're going to pull up those loops, 1, 2, 3. And then we're going to insert our hook. Oh, and I should make sure we're not actually working into the slip stitches here. I should make that clear. We're working into the single crochets behind the decorative slip stitches. Okay, so here's the slip stitches that we did in the last round. We're actually working behind that right here. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now we're going to do 1 more of those linked double trebles. So pick up a loop here, here, and here, and then we're going to insert our hook into the next stitch, yarn over, grab that loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, whoops, and yarn over, pull through 2. All right, and that is our last linked double treble, and that creates our next socket, and then we would chain 20 again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on, okay? And then we would connect that to our next bulb and just continue until you get to the very last bulb. And then when you do get to the very last bulb and you finish your double treble, just like that, then you would give yourself a nice long yarn tail. As long as you want to deal with it for sewing, you're gonna have to add some more, you're gonna have to like, it's not gonna be long enough to sew on the entire cord with the sockets, but you know, just give it as long as you can. Cut it off and then pull it through. You can just kind of fasten that off, and then you can use that as a yarn tail to stitch things together to your sweater. So let me show you how that works, how stitching it onto your sweater works. So let's just, I'll move this out of the way here, and I will grab my finished, so this has 10 light bulbs on it here, and all my colors. And I'm gonna grab my thrift store sweater, bring that in. All right, maybe we can back out. That's great. Okay. And don't worry about those little shiny spots on the bulbs. Those are going to be added later after it's assembled, after it's put onto your sweater. All right, so what I like to do is I like to place all of the light bulbs on first, and don't worry about the cords and the sockets for right now. So So, you know that I want to have 5 bulbs on the front, so that means we're going to have one right in the center because it's an odd number. So we'll place that one in the center. And then keep in mind when you get over to the shoulders that you want to have about half as much space from your light bulb to that fold in the shoulder. That should be about half as wide as the space between bulbs, if that makes sense, because you're going to have another bulb on the other side. And it does not need to be perfect. In fact, maybe your style is a little more like, eclectic, and you actually want to place some of your bulbs on like this. You could really just sort of put them on there however you want. You don't have to, they don't all have to be like perfectly arranged pointing down how I had mine. I didn't have I should say mine were not perfectly arranged, but they were all pointing in the same direction, kind of radiating out from the neck. I just chose to do them that way. I felt like that was sort of like a compromise between having them on there kind of willy-nilly and having them on there like trying to control it too much. Sometimes when you try to control crochet too much, it just gets frustrating. And then it loses some of its fun, right? So what I'm looking at here when I'm spacing these bulbs, what I'm looking at is the distance from the bulb to the neck. Is mostly, I'm keeping my eye on that, and I'm also looking at the spacing between bulbs, just to kind of make that as, fairly evenly spaced. And then you can use stitch markers for this, or you can use pins if you like. I'm going to use some pins, I think. And then I'm going to pin each bulb in place in the sweater. So I'm going to reach my hand in here so that way I know that I'm not pinning through to the back side of the sweater. You can also just place a piece of paper in here instead, or a cardboard or something like that, so that you're not pinning through to the other side of the sweater. And when you place a pin, here I'll place some stitch markers in case you're using that too, but when you place a pin, it's like you're sewing with that pin. You're going to go in and out and in and out. Okay, that's going to make it hold in place the best. Okay, so I'm going in, through 2 layers and out, and I'm kind of bending my piece and in and out. Okay, and then I always push that little tip into the fabric just because I know if I don't do that, I am going to stick myself with the pin. Oh, and so just in case you guys are using stitch markers, I just want to show you how to do that. I would put at least 2 stitch markers in, maybe one at the tip or near the tip. And I'm making my stitch marker go through the fabric. My hand is behind so I can kind of push it into place. So I've got one there. And I'm going to put another one in here. And feel free to use more pins or more stitch markers, whatever makes it feel more secure for you. There's a fine line between making it nice and secure and also making it in your way. So there's that also. And I just pin on half at a time. I just don't even worry about what's happening on the back side of the sweater until I get there, because for me, it's just easier to just kind of let them hang out until I get to that section instead of, flipping it back and forth between the front and the back. All right, so once I get all the bulbs pinned in place, I don't even worry about this. I just let that hang out there because we don't need to sew the socket and the cord in place unless you're having doubts about how you think it's gonna look. If you're looking at it and you're thinking, I don't really know, is that enough space or too much space? Then you may wanna arrange everything and actually for real pin it in place, just to see if you like how it looks, because once you start stitching, you can't, you're gonna be stitching in a contrast color to your sweater, so you will be able to pull it out if you don't like it, but it's better to get that all figured out beforehand if you're at all worried about it. So you can go ahead and arrange your cord and pin it in place. Use stitch markers or pins or whatever you like, just to make sure you really like the spacing. Because you may find like you feel like you have too much cord, and then you might want to bring the lights down just a little bit, because then you can pull them further away from each other. And you might be wondering, like, do I have to have a raglan or a circular style yoke for this? You don't. You can definitely have like a boxier sweater. You can still be arranging your light bulbs in that sort of shape, and it'll just go up over the shoulders and around to the back. It doesn't matter. I do have this nice raglan sweater and that circular yoke, and that seems to be easiest for arranging the light bulbs, but you can totally do this with a boxy sweater. And also, you don't have to put them around the neck. You could just have like some wild holiday lights running from like your shoulder down to the waist, to one side. That would be really cute. Or running along down one arm would be fun too. You can get creative with it and put it onto your sweater however you like. All right, so now I'm going to just start stitching these bulbs in place. So we'll start with the center one here. So this is where my sharp tapestry needle comes in a little bit handy. If you don't have that, that's okay. You can use a regular tapestry needle. I just find that it can slice through the yarns a little bit better and give me more precision when I'm sewing, so that's why I prefer this. So you can place a piece of paper or your hand underneath your light bulb so that you're making sure you're not stitching this to the back of your sweater. And this is where we came out. We didn't really do anything to fasten that off. We just kind of pulled it through. So now we're going to take a stitch right over here, and that's going to bring that little loop down in place. And I'm going to come out just underneath that slip stitch. And here, let me pull that out of there so you can see what's happening here. So when we do that, we can watch right here. That kind of brings that into place, that little edge. And now we're going to be stitching right along the tops of that last round of single crochet. Okay, not into the slip stitches, which are sitting on front. Those are just gonna sit there on the front and look pretty while we stitch into these stitches on the back. Okay, so I'll take a little stitch in here and then come out about 2 stitches forward for now and pull that through. And now I'm going to do something that's called a back stitch, which is where you are, I'm right-handed, so my needle will always be facing to the left. If you were left-handed, your needle would be facing to the right, and you can watch this in a mirror and it'll look like how you would do it. But you're going to place your needle into the stitch behind where it came out. Okay, so you're kind of working backwards, and you're going to go 2 steps forward. Okay, so we're going to go 1 step past where our yarn is right here. So right there. And now we're going to go back in behind. So 1 step back and 2 steps forward. One step back, 2 steps forward. One step back, 2 steps forward. One step back, 2 steps forward. So we're just going to continue working our way around. We're stitching into those, that edge underneath the slip stitch edging. And you can see I keep turning my sweater instead of turning my hand, because it gets really awkward to sew in a different direction. So 1 step back, 2 steps forward. And you should be stitching through the thickness, excuse me, through the thickness of your sweater. Okay, so you will see some stitches on the wrong side of your sweater. I'll show you what that looks like in just a minute. All right, We're getting close to where we started at the top of that, top of that bulb. So I'm using, this is my thumb right here. I'm using that to just hold this in place. Sorry if I'm blocking too much here. I'll try to open up, but basically I'm using my hand to grip onto that from behind. And so that way my hand is making a space between layers of the sweater. So I know I'm not gonna stitch this into the back of the sweater because that would be very frustrating. All right, so we have made it around to the beginning here. And I'm gonna push my needle back down through, and now you can see my stitches on the wrong side here. Let's see, did we get caught on something? Yes. There we go. All right, and then we can just weave in our ends. Like that. And cut that off. All right. And then I'm going to remove that pin here. And then you can continue doing that to all of the other bulbs, get them all stitched on there. And then I'm going to show you how to put that little bit of that shine in the bulb. And then you can do that at this point, or you can do it, you know, after you stitch the cord in place. It doesn't matter. And you can use chain stitch embroidery if you prefer using that, but I'm going to use a little bit of crochet, surface crochet here. Let's see. Oh, Valerie's saying, looks like you're doing Tunisian crocheting for the sockets. Yes. Linked stitches pretty much are the Tunisian simple stitch. It's just that you think of your work as being held sideways, kind of. But it's exactly the same thing, and you're making that same fabric. Yeah, exactly, Valerie. Yep. And that's the reason I chose that for this project, is because I really wanted to crochet along and then drop down and be able to make some really tall stitches here and link them together to create the socket. And I didn't want them to be separating. I didn't want that, you know, I could have made regular double trebles right here, but then I was worried it wouldn't look very tidy because I was worried you'd see little cracks of the sweater showing through between. So I really wanted to, you know, use those linked stitches, or, you know, that Tunisian simple stitch basically, to create this little block of fabric in the sort of vertical direction, if that makes sense. Okay, so we're going to be adding, you just need a little strand of your white yarn that you're going to use for the shiny spot, and we're going to start somewhere over on the side of the bulb. Let me pull this in here just so you guys can see what I'm doing. So you can see with these little shiny bits, they're in about the same place on each bulb. I feel like that made it look the most realistic, like the source of light is coming from up above to the right. It doesn't matter if you put them on this side or if you put them on this side. It doesn't really make a difference, but I just feel like if you make them uniform like this, the shiny spot in the same spot, it really helps like make it look like it's a shiny object instead of just sort of like a little chunk of white on there for some reason. All right, so we're going to start right over here on the side. This is actually the space between so here's those 3 double crochets we placed into that last stitch. So 1, 2, 3. I'm going to go in the space right before that third to the last double crochet. Okay, so that's where I'm going. It doesn't need to be, you don't need to do it exactly the same spot I'm doing it. I'm just letting you know in case you really want to be, you know, following along here, just, you know, in case that's helpful to you. So we're going to grab the yarn with our hook, and we want to make sure there's enough yarn on both sides here. And we're going to just pull that through our sweater and pull it through our light bulb. And I'm going to be holding on to this strand of yarn underneath the sweater to keep a little bit of tension on it. I'm hanging onto it right now. So I'm going to insert my hook into the next space right there. I'm going to kind of curve my way around. I'm inserting it through there and through my sweater. I'm going to grab that yarn, pull through, and pull through the loop on my hook. I'm going to do that again in the next space. Inserting through, yarn over, pull through, pull through. One more here. Inserting it through, grab that yarn, pull through, and pull through. And then I'm going to pull the whole thing through like that, through my fabric to the front. And then I'm going to thread my needle with both yarn tails. And then I'm going to go back through the fabric just to the outside. See how that there's a loop right here, that very last stitch we made. I want to go right back down in that, basically right next to that loop. Like that, and pull that into place. And then we can go ahead and just weave in our yarn tails again. So I'm weaving it into the thickness of the fabric. Like that. A couple of directions, and I'm going to cut that off. Okay, so you would just repeat that for all of the bulbs. And then to stitch the socket and the cord on, let me grab a little bit of the, here, we'll start with this end. Okay, so you would wait, of course you would have all of your bulbs stitched on in place first. You don't have to do the shiny spot. You can do it now or you can do it later. And I'm just going to grab a little bit of this green yarn here. Let's see. It's my secret yarn stash. All right, I'm just going to grab a chunk of that green yarn. You would be able to start with one of the ends. If you had pinned the whole thing all the way around, you've got yarn tails, you can just go ahead and grab a yarn tail. But since I'm starting near this, the only bulb that I have stitched on, I'm just going to go ahead and just grab a little yarn, a new strand of yarn here. And this will show you how to add a new little bit of yarn. So let's just say this bulb has already been stitched. To anchor my like a new yarn tail, I'm going to come in from behind on this, basically on this little socket, and kind of pre-weave in my end just a little bit here, because we have a nice, fairly dense section to weave into. And then I'm going to kind of run my needle over to where that cord is so we can get that stitched in place. Okay, so just imagine all the bulbs are stitched in place and we're just doing, the sockets and the cords right now. So when I do this, I usually just kind of pin it in one or two places. You may find that you need, multiple spots pinned or, held in place with stitch markers, however you like to do it. You could also use, a washable marker and draw on there if that's helpful to you. But just make sure when you're picking this up, it can kind of distort things. So you want to make sure it is not pulled to the side or doing anything weird. When you pick it up, just kind of be looking at it, making sure you're not distorting your stitches. And then we're going to do a back stitch. So again, I know this color is a little bit dark, but you're going to go back into your work behind where your strand came out. Okay, so it's here. You're going to go back in here and take, 2 steps forward like that. And then 1 step back. Here's our 1 step back and 2 steps forward. One step back, 2 steps forward. You don't have to go into every single chain if you don't want to, but I would go into most of them. It looks the best if you have more stitches closer together as opposed to, just tacked here and there, because then it doesn't lay very flat and it just looks a little bit messy if you try to try to go too fast here. All right. Remove that. Looks like we've got, oh, Martha's saying, I think they are even if you didn't add the shine. So maybe you're saying they are, they do look like Christmas lights even if I don't add that? Or they're even? Oh, do you have a pattern for the sweater you're wearing? Hi, Tabitha, I just saw your question. Yes, actually this sweater that I'm wearing is another class that I did that I teach on Craftsy or on the Creative Crochet Corner website. It is, let me think, what did I call it? Made to Measure Granny Square Pullover, I think is the name of it. But you'll see a picture of this very sweater on that, on the icon that you click on to learn more about it. But it's basically a class teaching you how to make a granny square sweater that looks like this, how to do the neck shaping without doing any math at all. And it's basically just like working granny square from the center out, and it's made to measure, so it can fit anybody. You don't have to follow a pattern, but it's basically like a system of how to create a sweater that fits you, that looks like a granny square sweater, like what I'm wearing. It's a very fun way to make sweaters because, it's just like, you don't have to worry about getting the stitch count exactly, matching someone else's gauge. You don't have to follow someone's pattern. And you kind of go and you just keep going until it fits, basically. So there isn't, it's very, it's very relaxed. It's a very non-stressful way of making a sweater, I feel like. Okay, so I should probably explain what I'm doing here. I'm stitching, still doing that back stitch, and I'm just stitching around the edges of this socket. Just like that. And then when I get to the top, I do maybe a stitch in this direction. I still want to stitch across that top edge. Don't skip that because I feel like it really still, it needs to be stitched all the way around the whole edge. And then you can come over across and then continue on to the next little section of cord. Okay, then, decide how you want that to be. So I did some, just little wiggles. I did some where I twisted it and pinned it down in that sort of like a little loop-de-loo. Sometimes the loops go down, the loops could go up, get kind of creative with how to place your cord in there. If it looks too uniform, your eye might be drawn to certain parts, so try to, kind of change it up between each set of bulbs, make it look a little bit different. So yeah, and that is basically it. I just want to check in here and make sure I'm not missing anything. Oh, thanks, Tabitha. I'm glad you like my sweater. All right, well, I really appreciate you guys being here. I hope that this looks like a fun project for you guys. I hope that some of you guys make these for your Christmas outfits for the season. But if not, you can add it to a pillow, you could put it on a card, you can make a garland. That was a great suggestion as well. There's lots of uses for this little, method of creating these Christmas lights. So if you are making it in a garland, you can just do this little slip stitch stuff. That little shiny spot, you could just do that after you create the bulb because you're not actually stitching it to anything. The reason that I like to wait and do that after I get the bulb stitched to the sweater is because it's an additional place where we're actually sewing through the fabric of the sweater, and I feel like it helps to hold the bulb flat instead of just being stitched all the way around the outside edges. I know this is pretty close to the edge, but it really does seem to help and keeps it from getting kind of puffy or kind of pulling away from the sweater behind it. So that's why I like to wait until later and go through both layers at the same time. It's just basically you're sewing it to your sweater at the same time you're adding the decoration. It's just kind of a win-win with that process. All right, so that's about it. So you just go ahead and sew that on and then have fun being the center of attention at your next holiday party. I wanted to mention too, if any of you guys are knitters or interested in knitting, I am going to be teaching a live event in about half an hour on how to make some mittens. I'll show you what they look like. So these mittens are made with an emphasis on using scraps. So again, we come back to that scrappy part of my personality where I really like to make things out of what you got. So these are a very quick knit. They make a really great gift. So if you're interested in knitting, come on back in like a little less than a half an hour and I'll show you how to make these. Thanks everybody for joining me. I really appreciate it. Bye everyone.